Hi, everyone. Welcome. My name is Jessica, and I would love to share a little bit. I'm going to facilitate today's webinar. And thank you for joining Project Sentinel, Legal Aid at Work today. And we are here to learn about COVID-19 related rights and protections as we have as tenants and workers. We understand that today, now more than ever, so much is happening, which can create confusion among existing laws that really govern tenants and workers, but we're really here to remind you that protections exist now more than ever. Is all your rights to really defend yourself, and we're here to provide you information, answer some brief questions, along with passing all the available resources that we have. I did want to talk a little bit about some housekeeping rules, but before we do that, we're going to do some introductions. And again, my name is Jessica Berrigan Carmona, pronounced she and her, and I'm a community organizer with Legal Aid at Work. And I am based out of Stockton, and I'll pass it over to Nora.
Hi all, thank you so much for being here today. My name is Nora. I also use she, her pronouns, and I'm an attorney at Legal Aid at Work based out of Modesto, and I will pass it to Anna.
Nora, hi, this is Ana Andrade, Fair Housing Coordinator with Project Sentinel. So I get the opportunity on a daily basis to advocate for tenants that are experiencing housing discrimination, and I also educate housing providers. So thank you for joining us today. Go ahead.
Thank you. Sorry about that. And I'm Mark Delvin. I'm the landlord tenant case manager for Stanislaus County, also with Project Sentinel.
Awesome. Thank you all. So before we jump into our informative presentation, I did want to remind us of some logistics or housekeeping, starting off with which this webinar will be recorded. So please check out Project Sentinel's webpage where all of these recordings will be posted. We will invite you or have a portion of our presentation where questions will be answered. So towards the end, a reminder to use the chat when you have questions, and then we'll be able to shuffle around which organization can answer, or maybe both. And as well, we're gonna now, and towards the end of the webinar, ask you to take a brief survey on how the presentation went or things we can improve. But before we do that, we do have a brief poll to see who is in the audience. So I know that's going to be administered with some questions. So we're going to give you about 30 seconds to respond.
They can mark more than one box.
Great. Give folks about an extra 15 seconds. I know we have 3 questions. Awesome. Now I'm going to kick it off and start our presentation. Which I believe Anna will be sharing her screen.
Yes.
Is that correct?
Okay. Yeah, that's correct. But can we share the poll results? Is that possible? Awesome. So who do we have today in our audience? Let's see, Modesto's highly represented. Let's see, 19%. We have Turlock, Patterson, and other. I wonder where the other's from. Let's see, question number 2, are you a housing provider? Yes, and actually no, 95% say no, they're not housing providers. So then they're tenants or homeowners. How did you learn about Project Sentinel? I'm sorry, I'm trying to look at here. The other is definitely 38%. Looks like the internet, social services, and so forth. So this is great. Thank you so much for participating in our poll. It really gives us a sense of, where the audience is from and how we can best serve you. I also want to give a huge shout out to Legal Aid at Work for partnering with us. We're super excited that this partnership is happening and that we're here today to offer you a little bit of what we do on a daily basis, right, to help our community. So let me go ahead. I'm going to share our screen so we can go ahead and get started. Okay, so I'm with Project Sentinel. I'm a fair housing coordinator, and as I mentioned before, my whole purpose is to advocate for individuals that are experiencing housing discrimination. I do that on a daily basis, and as I said before, I also help housing providers. Let me start by saying that the pandemic has compounded the challenges that tenants face. Here at Project Sentinel, we've seen an increase in calls related to familial status discrimination, gender discrimination, as well as disability and Section 8 discrimination. And you're probably thinking, well, what are these things, right? I'll go into detail about each protected category. So let me go ahead and actually do that for you all. Okay, here we go. So I mentioned some protected categories, right? As I spoke about, the level of calls or an increase in calls that we're getting because of the pandemic. I mentioned familial status, right? So that's definitely one. And there's two categories. So the Fair Housing protects, there's protections, federal protections, and there's state protections. I'm not going to read through all of them, but I will mention a few that are very key and that we constantly get calls from tenants and housing providers. Again, familial status, disability, gender, okay, in the federal arena. Also, the state also protects us. And there's a lot more protections here in California versus the state, right? We have protections related to familial status, sexual orientation, age. Earlier, I mentioned, Section 8, right? Section 8 discrimination that falls under source of income, right? Immigration status. So again, discrimination is covered by federal and the state, okay? So hopefully I'm not going too fast and you can all hear me. Okay, so, our department here at Project Sentinel, we have our fair housing unit, and we also have our tenant landlord, right? So our fair housing unit deals only with issues covered by state and federal laws. So when we, when a client or a caller approaches us regarding a potential allegation of discrimination, we have to determine whether or not it's related to discrimination. And that oftentimes is very tricky. I just had a conversation with my supervisor today regarding this. We get callers all the time and clients that say, well, I'm being discriminated. My landlord's being unfair and so unprofessional. He or she yells at me and it's just so unfair. They roll their eyes at me and it's just rude. Well, that unfortunately is not, housing discrimination. It's just rude behavior that shouldn't be tolerated. So we have to dig deep and we have to figure out if in fact there is a fair housing angle. In other words, is there discrimination in whatever the caller or client is describing to us? So familial status. So familial status has to do with minors. So if you have a minor in the home, especially with the pandemic, we've seen a lot of people or students, kids, having to stay home, right? They're doing long distance learning and they're staying at home. So what happens, right? They're at home, they're playing around more often, there's a lot more noise, they're probably outside, and that's okay. That's okay for young people or children to be doing to, enjoy their environments. However, we often get calls where, let me move this around here, where our callers will say something to the effect of, I received a notice from my landlord, I received a notice, it's a termination notice, or they're getting language in a notice that says children are not allowed to play outside, or your child is creating too much noise. Definitely that to me is discrimination, and it's familial status, right? If it's related to children and they're being targeted because of certain things, definitely we can step in and we can assist. And you might be thinking, well, what if it is in fact happening? It's too much loud noise and they're running around. Of course, as a fair housing organization, we mediate, we try to investigate and figure out what the true cause is. Is it actual discrimination because of the children, or is it just, they're in fact being loud and noisy? So we get a lot of those calls. Recently too, because of the pandemic, we've been getting calls related to gender. So I recently had a case where a survivor of domestic violence was given a termination notice because she called the police. Her partner physically abused her, and the landlord did not appreciate the loud noise and the fact that the police were over. She received a termination notice. This is definitely a case of discrimination, and this person has protections. On a daily basis, I work with also individuals that have disabilities, and they are afforded a lot of opportunities per se, reasonable accommodations. On a daily basis, I request extensions of tenancy. Oftentimes individuals will have emotional support animals or service animals, and they're allowed to be in the home. They're allowed to be in the apartments. However, there's a process, and that's what we help individuals understand, and housing providers understand, that you have to navigate certain things and explain to the housing providers what they can and can't do. So I know this was brief and definitely towards the end. If you have any questions, you can ask, or you can definitely reach out to us. Our fair housing contact is listed here. We also have our website where you can download our brochures on the many different protected categories of federal and state. We also have toolkits on our website. And please, if you are thinking right now, after I kind of discussed what discrimination is and in the fair housing arena, and you think, well, I might have something, I might be experiencing that, give us a call. We have intake counselors that will review your situation, and they'll determine whether or not it's a fair housing case, and then it'll be sent to us. You can call us at, thank you, Nora, for doing that. It's listed there. Hopefully you can see it, 888-324-7468. Feel free to give us a call. Like I said, I know this is brief, but hopefully you've gotten a sense of what's happening here locally, right? And what the pandemic has done to our tenants. We're definitely here to assist anyone that might be experiencing housing discrimination, but remember, it has to be connected to the federal and state protected categories. Okay, I'm going to go ahead and turn it over to our partner agency.
Great. Thank you so much, Anna, and thank you for all of that great information. Would you mind just continuing to share your screen there, or?
Yes.
Okay. Thanks. I think it's just the next slide.
It is, but it never fails, right? Whenever you're doing these, oh, here we go. Ta-da!
Oh, there we go. Okay, wonderful. Well, yeah, I mean, as we've all discussed, we're just so excited to be able to work with Project Sentinel to better serve folks here in the community. And my coworker Jess and I are here today to talk a bit more about workers' rights. So Legal Aid at Work is a workers' rights nonprofit. We serve low-wage workers all across the state, but Jess and I are particularly focused on helping folks out here in the Central Valley where we live and work. If I could just go to the next slide, please. So how we do that is we have a helpline. We just dropped the number into the chat there. So if you take away nothing else from what I'm about to say, just give us a call, have a chat. It's free, it's confidential, and we can help you figure out if there's an issue in the workplace, or if we can't help you, we'll try and find somebody else who can. And that's going to be kind of a common refrain throughout the rest of this discussion. So what we do is we help low-wage workers with issues in the workplace. And so I've included here a few examples of what those could be. So there's wage theft. You're just not being paid what you're owed. You're not getting overtime. You're not getting your meals and rest breaks, things like that. There's also discrimination, harassment, and retaliation. And actually, in California, when you're looking at what Anna was just talking about all of the different categories, identities that are protected, and that your housing provider can't treat you differently because of those identities, your employer also can't treat you differently because of those identities. And they also can't be harassing you because of those identities. And so I think sexual harassment is something like the most common example, and something that we do help folks out a lot with who are experiencing that in the workplace. But any kind of harassment, or you report the harassment and then you're being retaliated against, that's also something we can help out with. We have accommodations and time off for yourself or to care for other family members. Unemployment insurance, which of course has really blown up during the pandemic as folks have become a lot more employment insecure. The rights of survivors of domestic violence or sexual violence, as Anna mentioned, that's very much a protected category. And California actually has some particular rights for folks who are survivors as they're navigating the court system or need to take time off to make themselves or their families more safe. We do a lot of work with LGBTQ workers' rights, and we have some staff members particularly focused on serving that community. And then, as I'm about to talk about a little bit more about during this presentation, just kind of scratch the surface, is about workplace issues as they relate to the pandemic and COVID-19. And so this next slide, if you wouldn't mind, please. So I'm just very briefly wanted to go over some rights that currently exist for workers during the pandemic. I know it feels like things are changing every day. And so I wanted to give you a snapshot of what things are looking like right now. And again, of course, encourage you to reach out to us if you have any questions, or if it's like maybe one of these things aren't happening in your workplace or you're not sure about it. And our helpline is in the chat still. So employers do have a responsibility to create a COVID-19 prevention program and to share that with their employees. So you have the right to see that. Employers also have to train workers on COVID-19 hazards and how to be safer. They have to screen workers for COVID-19 symptoms, and they have to regularly clean commonly touched surfaces, and they have to train workers on how to safely use the cleaning chemicals. So those are all kind of how to make the work environment safer. In terms of actual employees, employers can require testing. They can ask if you're vaccinated, and they can ask for proof of vaccination. And employers can also require vaccines as long as they provide reasonable accommodations for folks with disabilities or who need religious accommodations. But if you have questions about that, always happy to chat more, or you can drop your question into the chat or into the Q&A box that's at the bottom of your screen. I did want to highlight that workers who are not fully vaccinated are still required by the state to wear masks indoors, unless with some exceptions that I noted here. And there are also some workplaces like healthcare where there are stricter rules. So these are just kind of the base rules. And if you could go to the next slide. I did also want to talk about what happens when people get sick at the workplace. And so that is when somebody at your workplace has COVID, gets sick with COVID, and then what does the employer need to do about that? So if there is at least one COVID case, the employer needs to, and I don't know if it's possible, but this is on the next slide, notify workers who had close contact and could have been exposed to the person. Just one before that, actually. Oh, perfect. Thank you so much. So they have to notify workers who have had close contact with that person or who could have been exposed. The employer has to offer testing to employees after that potential exposure, and that testing has to be done. The employee can't be charged for it, and it has to be done during paid time. And then finally, and the thing that folks aren't always as aware of is if you were exposed to someone with COVID-19 at the workplace and you are not fully vaccinated, or you now have COVID-19 symptoms, the employer is required by law to quarantine you and exclude you from the workplace until it's safe for you to return. And during that exclusion or that quarantine, the employer has to provide you with your normal full pay and benefits and allow you to return to the workplace once it's safe again. It's called exclusion pay. It's part of the emergency temporary standards that are issued by Cal OSHA, which is the state agency charged with workplace health and safety issues. And if your employer isn't providing you with these benefits to keep you and your coworkers safe, you can call us and we'd be happy to talk about it and see if they're in compliance with the law or not. You can also file a complaint directly with your local district office of Cal OSHA if you want, and make that complaint that your employer is not following their laws. The requirements go up as there are more COVID cases at work. So for instance, if there are more than 3 COVID cases, then workers have to wear face coverings indoors and outdoors if there can't be distancing. And so there's a question about the exclusion and how long people have to be excluded for. It varies. 10 days is kind of like the usual marker. So it has to be at least like 24 hours since a fever's gone away and the symptoms have improved, and at least 10 days have passed since the symptoms first appeared. Or if this is somebody who is not showing symptoms but is not fully vaccinated, it would be 10 days, at a minimum of 10 days since, positive test, but no symptoms, it's 10 days since the positive test. And then there are also a few more kind of different variations of that. But 10 days is kind of the general metric, and I'd be happy to chat with folks more if you're like, well, this is my particular situation. How long am I out for this? If there's over 20 folks in the workplace who have COVID-19, so for instance, you're like at a packing plant or something that's where people are close together and more likely to be exposed, then there are more requirements. Like now there need to start being physical barriers put into place and things like that. And if you wouldn't mind going to the next slide. Oh, and I just see there's a question about fully vaccinated. Does that include booster shots? At the moment, those are not required. It's considered in the law to be 2 weeks, at least for Pfizer and Moderna, 2 weeks after your second shot. But that could be changing as boosters become more common. Right now, I believe they're just recommended. So the paid leave, there's this program called Supplemental Paid Sick Leave. And that was available for folks between January of this year and the end of September, so about a month ago, for a variety of reasons. You've got up to 2 weeks of paid time off for if you were exposed to COVID-19 or had COVID, you were needed time off to get vaccinated, you needed time off for side effects from vaccination, you were caring for somebody with COVID-19, there was a childcare closure because of a COVID-19 outbreak. So if you had to take time off between January and September for those reasons, and you weren't paid for that, you can still get paid now for that time. If you took time off, say last week, or you end up having to take time off in December, then this program won't apply to you anymore because it ended as of the end of September. Although, as I said, if you had the absence back in August and you just still haven't been paid for it, the employer still needs to pay you, and we can help out with that. But there are other programs that still exist if you need paid time off. And so that's what I wanted to kind of spend my remaining time here talking about. California does require at least 3 days of paid sick days for all employees. Employers have to offer at least 3 paid sick days a year. And those are also safe days for survivors of domestic violence. If you're sick and you have a serious health condition and so you can't be at work and your doctor has said that you shouldn't be at work, you could qualify for short-term disability insurance, also known as SDI. Or if you're caring for a family member who has a serious health condition, you might qualify for paid family leave or PFL. Those two programs, SDI and PFL, you're already paying into with every paycheck. And so if you need to take those programs, I really, encourage you to make use of them because it's already money that you've paid into the system as part of those benefits. If you have a workplace injury, and that can include like a serious health condition that comes out of a COVID-19 outbreak at work, you could qualify for workers' compensation. And so that includes help with your medical bills, but could also include disability payments while you're not able to work. The emergency temporary standard exclusion pay is what I just mentioned. If you are being excluded from the workplace because of exposure to COVID-19. And all of the things I just mentioned, paid sick days, SDI, PFL, workers' comp, exclusion pay, and the supplemental paid sick leave for absences before the end of September, those are available to folks regardless of immigration status. Anybody can qualify for these. Undocumented, documented, whatever, everyone gets it. For folks who do have work authorization and who are not undocumented, unemployment insurance is also available and is something that you could take advantage of if you need to. If you go to the next slide, I just wanted to highlight this pretty cool website that the state put out recently. And I can drop it here in the chat, I think. I'm just gonna, oh, maybe I can. I'll get it into the chat. But the basically you can click on any of the blue buttons on the side. This is just a screenshot from when I was playing with it earlier. And you can click on like, I may have been exposed to COVID-19 or my child's daycare was closed. It's then going to ask you a set of questions and then give you a list of the programs and benefits that you could qualify for and the ones that your particular situation doesn't apply for. And so I would just really encourage you to make use of that resource if you have questions or, just give us a call. So if you wouldn't mind going to the last slide, I will get that link into the chat, and then we already there have our helpline. And so if you still have any questions about your workplace rights, or if this anything I said kind of raised a red flag for you, please go ahead and reach out. We answer our calls in English and Spanish and can also provide services in a host of other languages. And it's all free and confidential, and you'll talk to me or Jess. So you've seen our faces, and we'll look forward to chatting with you. And thanks so much for your time today. I will pass it to Mark.
Okay, thank you very much. A lot of valuable information there. Anna, can you do the next slide, please?
Yes, I'm sorry. I do want to mention that we have a delay on my end, so I apologize if you're not able to see. There we go. Perfect.
There we go.
Awesome.
So real quick, for anybody who's a tenant out there or knows people who are tenants who have been impacted by COVID and unable to pay their full rent from March 2020 to September 31st, 2021, you can contact us at the number there at 209-236-1577, extension 11811, excuse me for that. And we have somebody that can help you either enter your application to get that rent paid. You can be protected. You can't be evicted. Get that going. And any landlords we have there, they also can encourage their tenants to call us to move forward with that. Because like you've been watching the news, there's lots of money out there the government has provided to the state that has not been dispersed that would help people from being displaced due to not able to pay the rent due to COVID. And that could be various. It could be lost your job, reduce your hours, stay home with your children. Those various things all work. I'm taking care of someone else who's impacted by COVID. And that's something I encourage you to get on that right away. The program now, there was lots of stories in the beginning, it was only paying 75%, now it's paying 100% of the rent not paid, and that really, really helpful. Any funding that's left over, then they're looking to pay into the future, as well as covering utility issues. So it benefits you in any way if you are unable to meet your bills during that period of time. So give us a call and give them a list and see if we can help you out and get that. As well as we are handling landlord tenant rights in this office as well, but they're appointment only. So give us a call with your name, a brief message, and a number, and we will call you back. Volumes of calls are very high now, as you can well imagine. And we will get back to you. I promise you, multiple calls won't help. Just give them a list, and we tend to triage the calls in the morning to get started.
Mark, I'm sorry to interrupt you. I was just
Sure.
getting some notices that folks can't hear you super clearly. I don't know if maybe you could move the microphone up a little bit or.
Okay, is that a little better?
Oh yeah, thanks. Sorry about that.
It was me then, the operator error, and I apologize. I can start over if they want, but basically anybody impacted, unable to pay rent during the period of March 2020 to September 31st, 2021, were impacted by COVID. You had to stay home, your hours reduced, or had to take care of a child. Give us a call at that number on the screen, extension 8118. Leave your name and number. We'll call you back and work with you to get the application going so you can get paid. If your landlord get paid, we won't be trying to put you out. Also, any operators are here, landlords, we encourage you to encourage your tenants to give us a call and see if we can help you out and at least try and get that bills paid so you can keep your house. There is a large amount of calls coming through us now, but if you call, leave your name, a number of requests, we will call you back. We'll get you. Everything is logged into the system and email type system, and we know you called, and we will call you back. And of course, we do basic landlord tenant rights for the whole of Stanislaus County. But we are appointment only now, and we've got lots of calls, but we are calling people back and trying to help them the best with their rights and their responsibilities during this period of time. That's all I have. Mine's short and sweet.
Okay, I would like to add a little bit of information in here, if you don't mind, on the eviction prevention, the eviction protections. Right now, everybody thinks that after October 1st, that there are no more eviction protections. But if a landlord is trying to take a tenant to court for unpaid back rent due to COVID, and the rent is unpaid because of COVID, that property owner is not going to be able to move forward with the unlawful detainer until they access a local or state program that will provide the unpaid back rent. So if they don't access those programs, that back rent, they should not be allowed by the court to move forward. The property owner is going to have to show proof that the tenant is ineligible for the state or local rent subsidy program. Okay, I just wanted to make sure that that information got out there loud and clear. Those rights are very, very important, or at least the court process is very important for everybody to understand at this time.
Yes, and thank you for that. Because, and also, even if the landlord is trying to remove the property from the market or make changes, there are some specific rules that landlord has to follow that are more stringent than they were before. Because the focus is to protect people from this place. Questions? I can't see the questions.
Yeah, I think we're ready for the questions and answers at this point.
Okay.
Great. And before we start off, we do encourage folks to use the chat. We'll give you a couple of seconds to write any questions you have in the chat, but also a reminder that our services would be best for people who have very specific questions around a particular case or situation to definitely use those resources by giving us a call, setting an appointment to best serve and answer the best of our ability, particularly if you have a very unique case. But we do have someone had a couple of questions actually, specifically I think around COVID-19 and in the workplace. And before we answer that one, we did have again a question around, does fully vaxxed include the booster shots? And I know, Nora, you mentioned that as of now it's recommended, but that can definitely change. And then we had the other questions are what not being paid on time, or do we currently have to wear a mask at work even if we are fully vaccinated? I don't know if we want to start with that question.
Yeah, I would be happy to answer those questions. So I'm not positive what we're getting at with the what about not being paid on time. That definitely can violate the law. You know, employers are required to pay you on time, and if they don't, then there could be waiting time penalties of up to a day of pay for every day that you're still waiting for your wages past when they were due. And you can collect those by filing a complaint with the California Labor Commissioner. They're sometimes also known as the Department of Labor Standards and Enforcement. But if you look up the Labor Commissioner, that's a good place to go. You can file an initial claim and say that you are not being paid on time. You can also, I mean, talk to your employer directly, of course, and say like, hey, you know, not only did you not pay me for 3 days and now you paid me, which is great, but you still owe me 3 days of waiting time penalties. And if you want any help navigating that or other questions about how something would work in particular, and even if they pay you partially, this still would count what I'm saying. So please feel free to give us a call if you had a more particular question around that. If you need to wear a mask at work, even if you are vaccinated. So the bare minimum rules set by the state is that masks have to be worn by non-vaccinated folks, not fully vaccinated folks. However, an employer can always have more rules than what the state requires. So an employer can require all employees, regardless of vaccination status, to wear masks in the workplace, as long as they're still making accommodations for folks with disabilities and who otherwise need them under the law. But just like, can an employer put in more safety protections than what the law requires? Yes, they can. And then finally, I know that there was a question about undocumented folks and how they can advocate for themselves if they're not getting paid sick days. I would rather answer that one personally, just based on like what this person's situation is. If the employer knows that the employee is undocumented or coming from a mixed status family, because that kind of like, how do you negotiate with your employer without immigration-based retaliation is something that we definitely help with, and I'd be happy to talk more about with folks. Undocumented workers do have all of these rights, but I know that it can be more complicated when there's retaliation, the threat of retaliation, which is illegal, but I also know that it does still sometimes happen. And then on the interns front, so these workers apply for employees, but can also talk more about that if it, like, you don't have to start paying a volunteer who you weren't previously paying, for instance, if that answers your question. And it looks like, well, I'll pass it to Jess for the next question.
Yeah, for the next question, we actually have one maybe Project Sentinel can help us answer is, are landlords allowed to require masks outside on the property when besides county, state, and federal laws? Or I'm not sure if Nora or Project Sentinel.
I'd have to know more on the details. If they're mandated to wear a mask in their apartment or the car, I would say no. But if you're going into the office, they may require you to wear a mask while you're in the office visiting the administration of the property. There may be more details that I don't have in this question, so I don't know how to answer that. But if they're mandating you in a common area, like a smoking area, if you're smoking, you can't wear a mask. And if you're in an eating area, again, you can wear the mask there. So I need some more details. If you want to call and leave a message at 236-1577. That's what I would recommend. And then also, there's another question I see here about how can seniors not working, not living with working relative access ERAP, can they prove covenant hardship in any way? That's very complex, and I can encourage you to call and that number and extension 8118, and you can talk to somebody who would be able to handle those questions and get a more specific answer from that one. And I also see another one about this public mental health code enforcement. That again, that's more complex. Any infestation, whether it's caused by the tenant or the landlord, but lack of pest control, or it's the landlord's priority to correct, but if the tenant caused the problem, could be billed back to them. So again, I would encourage to call us and leave a message and we'll talk directly about your specific situation.
And I believe we have another question on, are landlords allowed to restrict certain uses or people from coming over frequently?
The short answer would be no, but I need more details to understand why they're restricting that person's access.
You know, Mark, it still is a little hard to understand what you're saying.
It must be my headspace, or
Yeah.
allowed to booming. I'm not sure.
Okay.
Okay, and I
Yes.
should see a letter here about emotional support animal. They cannot evict or have an emotional support animal as long as we have the proper documentation, which would be a letter from the medical provider that's recommending this happen. Again, call us and we can make sure that we get handled either through our landlord tenant or through fair housing.
And then I know there's a last question, which, Mark, are you saying the last question about raising rent to also give you a call on that question?
So with that, again, I need more information depending on what type of contract you have and what type of property you live in, whether the landlord can raise the rent by $300. The short question would be if they're in an apartment and they're under a cap, 300 probably over that cap, and that would not be allowed. If they're in a single family home, the landlords have a little more leeway to raise the rent as high and as often as they want. However, if they increase the rent by more than 10% of what we're paying now, the increase notice must be written and handed to you and delivered to your front door. And if it's more than 10%, it has to be a 90-day period before the increase is made.
What is the current limit on the rent increases? If in an apartment, is it the
The effective August 1st is 9%.
Okay. Okay.
And I would
And
recommend
just-
they call us. Oh, sorry, I'm sorry. Recommend they
Yes.
call us again. We will talk directly about the details there.
Thank you so much. And Mark, can you give that number one more time? 209?
209-236-1577. And for the ERAP, which is rental assistance, it would be 8118. And if you want landlord tenant, extension 5 works.
Jessica and Mark, I do want to go ahead and chime in. I know that sounds a little muffled here. Thank you, Mark, for helping us out here. I know there's 2 fair housing questions that came up. Definitely, please, I'll put our information back on the screen, but give us a call. A lot of these questions do require more probing to determine whether or not they're fair housing related. But this one, are landlords allowed to restrict certain uses? Are people coming over frequently? That all depends, right? Oftentimes you'll have a lease and you'll have a clause regarding having unannounced or unauthorized occupants coming over. And typically it's usually like about a week. You can have people over a week, but it all depends on what your lease says. So let's say it's someone that is disabled, right? And they're having their son or daughter come every day. They don't live there, but they're coming every day to assist them with bathing or meal preparations. They're allowed to come over, of course. And then we would step in and we'd be able to possibly request a reasonable accommodation for this disabled person. But again, it all depends on the situation. So hopefully I've answered that question. It all depends. And then the second one, I'm a tenant and I have recently been prescribed an emotional support cat. The apartment manager said that I'll be evicted if I bring a pet. What should I do? I just brought the cat in a week ago. I can't afford to move. So again, that's definitely something that we can assist you with. That would be a reasonable accommodation for an emotional support animal. So give us a call. Yeah, so definitely it's key to have a good doctor's note that details the reason for the request, right? And language there that says something to the effect of your disability, not necessarily the details or the diagnosis, but language to that effect. But I can definitely assist. So give us a call. I think that was it.
I
I'd like
know
to-
there.
Go ahead.
Yeah, I'd like to just add about the having visitors over. If a person, I mean, if the people are like moving in for a week or 2 weeks, that's one situation that a lot of owners don't want to allow, to have somebody move in and let's say an unauthorized longer term guest would most likely not be allowed. But anybody who's coming over to visit, they should be allowed to visit as long as they abide by all the reasonable rules of conduct. And I'm going to emphasize reasonable. And so again, visiting is one thing, moving in and living is a different thing.
Yes, thank you, Anne. And I do want to point out, maybe in my talk here, I misspoke, but ESAs are not pets, people. So I just want to go ahead and make sure we're clear on that.
And one last thing I'll mention for tenants who may be having trouble with a guest visiting, the landlord giving a hard time. As a tenant, when you have a guest over and if they bring friends over, you're responsible for the behavior of all your guests. So just remember that when you have people come over.
And I know there was another question, is the raising of rent from state law or local law? And I know Mark responded saying it was state law. And then there's another question about my landlord is raising my rent starting November 1st by $300 a month. And so this question is going to require a little bit more detail. So definitely reminding this particular question or person to definitely give Project Sentinel a call, as this is a very more specific type of question. And it really depends. And those are all the questions we have. How about I give folks maybe another half a minute to answer, type in any other questions folks may have.
And then we also have the poll at the end.
Yes. And then maybe we can add the contact information. Oh, perfect. Yes. So we'll give folks one more. Oh, there's a question. Someone asked, would it be possible to get the law to raising rent to read it ourselves? So like maybe where can folks find the resources or handout of maybe raising rent that people can further read?
If they can call us and give their email, we can email it directly to their.
Okay, perfect.
It's based off the AD 1482. It was passed in January 1 of 2020.
Okay.
Do you think people understood that?
I don't know.
Okay, I'm going to hope so.
Yes, Mark said to call Project Sentinel and leave your email if you want that information.
Yeah, we might also be able to send that information out to all the people who registered for this workshop as well.
Got
We
it.
can do that as well. We have the flyer. We can send it out. And on one side, it's about the rent cap and the raising of rents, and the other side has to do with just cause.
Great. So Mark is saying that we can also have the ability to send out a handout that includes like rental cap and more information about rent increase to folks who attended the webinar. So that's not going to be a problem. That's really helpful. And it looks like there's more in the chat. Oh, someone said, how about fair housing contact info?
Yeah, so I am trying to access our PowerPoint here. For some reason, earlier we had it on here, Molly. It was on here, but I can't for the life of me get back on here to share once again our contact info. Let me just see here. We'll send it out. I'm hoping, Jessica, do you think that's possible to send out legal aid and our contact info to all our attendees today?
Yes, it sounds like Christina can help us out by sending this information to attendees afterwards.
Awesome. Thank you.
Awesome. That is really helpful. So I'm excited that folks are really interested in some of the resources. It sounds like there's a lot of need for our resources to get out there. So that's really exciting. And just a reminder, this is being recorded. So if you weren't able to catch something or you need to go back, you can definitely find this recording on Project Sentinel's, I believe, social media and possibly website. Okay, great. It sounds like it is going to be available afterwards. And then now we're coming a little bit closer, and we do want to give you some time to fill out a brief survey. So I know it's going to be part of, you're going to get a link from Zoom, if I'm not mistaken. And we do really encourage you to fill it out, as it's going to really help us understand how we can improve our webinar. And we really appreciate you sticking through it and asking questions and engaging with us. And it sounds like the survey will be delivered after the webinar ends with a link. So any other, oh, there's another question. Someone said, is it possible to get more information in the foreseeable future? So what are ways where folks can stay connected to our work? I know I personally subscribe to the newsletter email from Project Sentinel. So I know I checked out your website and I like signed myself up to receive things. I know I follow on Facebook. That's really helpful, but I don't know if someone from Project Sentinel wants to invite folks or give information how to access. And I know Nora and I are also providing information on our website. We will have a tab where all of our information will be found under Central Valley Workers Project. But again, we do invite you to, with Legal Aid at Work, Workers' Rights, our helpline, please reach out our helpline, check us out on our website, give us a call. We are very active on Facebook and do provide different events.
I expect Project Sentinel is trying to schedule a workshop like this once a quarter, once every 3 months. So we will be releasing those dates, hopefully in the near future.
Awesome. And it sounds like besides the survey being sent out, there'll be forms or different ways where the emails that you use to register will also be continuing to get more contact and invites for different things. So you're already connected, stay connected. And if you have any questions about any particular case, situation, concern, doubt, please give us a call. You have more than enough phone numbers to call, and always remember to give your name, your phone number, reason why you're calling. And I know Mark, Anna, and Nora and myself try our best to really respond to those questions and concerns, as we know we all live in the Central Valley and we definitely feel the need is there. But if that is all, I don't know if anybody else wants to say anything else, but thank you all so much for joining. It was the first one, but not the last one.
Yes, thank you so much, Jessica, Nora, and everyone for attending. We're very happy with the turnout and the information shared today. Thank you.